Greetings. This is Amy Wentley with Chai Knuckles Knitting, and this is episode 2020-28, Thrummed Slippers, Instep and Upper Foot. So this is the Cadeautje pattern by Ysolda Teague, and up until this point we have just finished the toe cap, and the toe cap is this garter stitch top of the toe. This is the rest of my slipper. This is the sole down here. And now we're going to work on the instep and the upper foot. And this section is a little confusing because you're going to be alternating between working flat and working in the round. So you have to follow the instructions very closely. If you see an instruction in this section that says next row, that is going to be a short section that's worked flat. If you see the instructions start with next round, that is going to be a row that you work all the way around the slipper. So follow along with me. And occasionally throughout the video, I'm going to pause so I can make some progress, and then I'll start up again where I can guide you with what to do next. So I just finished a purl row and I'm going to turn my work. And now I have the right side facing me, and this is the toe facing me. And the first instruction in the instep section says, knit to one stitch before the gap, slip, slip, knit, and turn. This is what you've been used to doing on the toe cap, so this is really nothing new. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to pull out my cord so I can get my magic loop business going here again. Okay. And it says knit to one stitch before the gap. And notice my yarn is in my left hand, off the left needle again. That's because I'm still doing short rows here. So I'm going to go ahead and knit to one stitch before the gap. So bear with me. See my gap over here? You can see it pretty clearly. So that's what I'm working towards. Okay, I've got 2 more stitches to do. And then I will stop at one stitch before the gap. Okay, so I'm one stitch before the gap, and I'm going to slip, slip, knit. And that's going to be one stitch that's decreased here. So slip, slip, slip as if to knit, slip as if to knit, insert the needle in the front, knit through the back loop. And then it says slip, slip, knit, and I'm turning again. So now I'm turning. And so the next instruction says next row, which leads me to believe that that's going to be another short row. Okay. And it's going to tell me to slip one, and I'm going to slip that as if to purl. Okay. And you'll notice that the inside, the wrong side of the slipper is facing me right now. So I'm going to slip one, and I'm going to purl to one stitch before the gap, and here's my gap. Okay. So I'm going to purl to one stitch before the gap. Scooch my stitches up there so they're easier to get to. Purl, purl. If you're ever having trouble sleeping some night, you can just turn on this video and watch me knit. Would that be relaxing? Maybe I should try that. Sometimes when I'm falling asleep, I'll knit in my head to help me fall asleep too. So, okay, so I got to 1 stitch before the gap, and I am going to purl those 2 together, and I'm going to turn. And I'm going to turn now, and I am actually going to have the outside, the right side of the slipper facing me. Here's the toe cap again. And the next instruction in the pattern says, next round. And it says, this round will be worked across the upper foot, all the way around the back of the slipper past the end of the row marker and back across the upper foot. Okay? What they're saying is that we're going to do another short row. So we're going to be knitting up into the gap and knitting those 2 together, or slip, slip, knit. Okay? And then it says without turning, knit to the end of the round marker here, slip the marker, knit 2, and then you're going to purl all the way here until 1 stitch before the gap. So here's my gap again. And then you're going to, where am I? Knit 2 together, and you're going to knit again to 1 stitch before this gap. So you're going to be doing another short row and slip, slip, knit, and you'll turn. Okay, so what that is, just one more time, is you're going to be doing a short row, then you're going to work all the way around, and then you're going to do another, you're going to bridge the gap here, but you're going to do another short row and end here. Okay, so what I am going to do is I am going to go ahead and I'm going to pause the video, and I'm going to get you most of the way around the slipper, and we're going to work that last short row together. So I'll be right back. Hi, I'm back. So what I did was I followed the instructions in the pattern at the point that says next round, and I slipped 1, and I knit to 1 stitch before the gap, and then I slip, slip, knit, and then without turning, I knit to the end of the round marker here, then I knit the end of the marker here, then I knit 2, and then I purled, and I'm at the point where I'm just finishing up this purl side. The one thing I want to mention to you is what's going on here now is that you are working, you're going to start working stockinette stitch on the instep coming off the toe. So in order to do stockinette stitch, and you're working the toe part flat, every time you're going to have to turn, and you're going to knit on the front and purl on the back. But after you do that for a couple of short rows, then you're going to work all the way around in the round, the rest, but you're going to be working garter stitch along the edges of the slipper in the round. So you're going to be alternating knitting and purling as you go around the rest of the slipper. And actually the knits and purls are kind of off on each half of the slipper. So you'll notice that we knit down this side, but we purled up this side. So now I'm working the part of the instruction that says purl to 1 stitch before the gap. So that's where I am right now. So I'm purling, and this is 1 stitch before this pretty significant gap here. And I'm going to knit those 2 together. Okay. And then this is where I'm starting to work a short row in stockinette on the toe cap here. Now I am going to knit to 1 stitch before the next gap. Okay, that's at the toe cap, and my gap is right there. So I'm going to do that. To 1 stitch before the gap. I appreciate your patience during all of this. There's my gap, is right there between these knit 2 togethers and the next stitch. So, okay, we are now there. And so it tells me to knit to 1 stitch before the gap and then slip, slip, knit, and turn. So I'm going to slip as if to knit, slip as if to knit, insert my needle in the front, knit through the back loop, and turn. The next instruction says next row. So we know this is going to be a short row. Pull this out. Okay, needle management. Okie dokie, we are good. Okay, so the next row says slip 1, purl to 1 stitch before the gap, and purl 2 together and turn. So this is another short row. So I'm going to purl to 1 stitch before the gap, purl 2 together and turn. It's rough working with big fat yarn and little tiny needles. So a lot of this feels like wrestling a kitten or something, or a little pink sheep. We're coming up close to the end. Where's the edge here? Okay. There we go, and there is my gap. So I'm going to purl to my gap. Oops. Wow. Fun watching your knitting teacher make mistakes. Those 2 stitches just fell off my needle, so I'm going to have to go ahead and work them again. And I'm going to go ahead and switch to English knitting because I think it might be easier for me to get around this corner. So I apologize, I do jump back and forth between continental and English knitting sometimes, so I just appreciate you bearing with me. So I'm almost there. Don't panic. Okay, and then where am I now? Where was my last? And that is my 1 stitch. Yep, that's my 1 stitch before the gap, because I see my line of decreases coming up here. So now I'm going to purl those 2 together and turn. So now the next instruction is another instruction for a round. Okay, so now again, we're back again with the slipper facing us with the toe cap. And what we're going to do here is we're going to do a short row. So we're going to slip 1, knit to 1 stitch before the gap, slip, slip, knit. And then without turning, this time we're going to purl to the end of row marker, to 1 stitch before the end of row marker. We're going to knit 1, slip the marker, and then we're going to knit all the way until we get back to this gap, knit 2 together, and then we're going to do another short row, knitting and turning. Okay, so I'm going to pause the recording one more time, and I am going to work this short row to the gap without turning. I am going to come all the way around, and I am going to knit or purl to 1 stitch before the end of round, then knit until this gap, and I will come back to you at this gap. Hello, I'm back again. So what I did during the break is that I slipped 1 stitch and I knit to 1 stitch before the gap, and I slip knit right there, and then without turning I purled all the way down the side until 1 stitch before the end of round marker, and I knit 1 stitch, and then I knit all the stitches up to here, and I'm about to get to the point in the instruction. It said knit to 1 stitch before the gap. So that's what I'm doing. So I am now 1 stitch before the gap. I'm going to knit 2 together, and I'm going to knit to 1 stitch before the next gap. There's my gap. Okay, 1 stitch, and then slip knit. So slip as if to knit, slip as if to knit, put the left needle in the front, knit through the back, and then slip knit, and it's turn. Okay, so that takes us to 1 chunk of the instep and the upper foot. Okay, what you'll notice now is that we're starting to get this stockinette instep that we're building, and we're also starting to add on to the garter stitch sides. And so what we're going to do is we're going to repeat exactly that a certain number of more times. And it says on the last round, don't turn after the SSK. And that's going to lead us into the cuff with a couple more little instructions that you can follow easily along, and then we'll go into the cuff. This section I just went over for you, you're going to either repeat all of that 2 more times or 3 more times, depending on which size slipper you are doing. So this part that you're going to be repeating is you're going to be slipping a stitch and purling to 1 stitch before the gap, and then you are going to purl 2 together and turn. And then you are going to start one of those funky rounds, and you're going to slip. You're going to be over here now. You're going to be slipping a knit stitch, knitting to 1 stitch before the gap, slip knit, and then without turning you are going to knit to the end of the round, slip the marker, knit 2, purl to 1 stitch before the gap, knit 2 together, knit to 1 stitch before the gap, slip knit, and turn. Then you're going to slip 1 stitch, purl to 1 stitch before the gap, purl 2 together, and turn. And then you're going to slip 1, purl to 1 stitch before the gap, purl 2 together, and turn. And then you're going to be starting the next round again, where you're going to be doing the knit, working around, and coming back again. So just follow the instructions very closely and you should be fine. And go ahead and keep your eyes alert for the next video that's coming up, which is going to talk about completing the cuff. Thank you very much for joining me. Bye-bye.